I'll be honest with you up front. When I saw the job posting, I thought it was spam. Night manager wanted Old Pine Motel, $50 an hour cash. Must work alone. Discretion required. $50 an hour for a motel night manager? In this economy? It's either a scam or somebody killed someone and needs a body disposed of. I'm not proud, but I was 3 months behind on rent, so I showed up anyways. The Old Pine Motel squatted to the edge of Route 47 like something had given up on life. The neon sign flickered, half the letters dead, and the parking lot was cracked and weed-choked. Perfect. I pushed to the glass door. The lobby smelled like stale cigarettes and air freshener, fighting a losing battle. Behind the desk sat a woman who looked like she'd been assembled from spare parts. Too much makeup, too tight a sweater, hair that might have been blonde once but had given up and gone yellow. "You here for the job?" Her voice had that particular rasp of someone who had smoked 2 packs a day since they were 12. "Depends. What's the catch?" She didn't smile. "Now catch us. You sit in a chair from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. You check people in if someone shows up, which they won't. You answer the phone if it rings, which it never does." She paused to examine her nails. "You stay out of room 7. "And that's it?" "That's it." "What's in room 7? Her eyes finally met mine, and for the first time I saw someone besides boredom. Something besides boredom. Beer. Actual, genuine beer. "Nothing good," she said quietly. "That's all you need to know. You get paid every Tuesday. Cash. No questions." She slid a key across the desk. Heavy brass. Old school. "Room 7's key has been missing. Has been for months. Nobody goes in there anymore." I should have walked out right then. Instead, I took the key and said, "When do I start?" My first shift started on a Tuesday, appropriately enough, because nothing happens on Tuesdays. The woman from before, whose name tag read Diane in fading letters, gave me a quick tour that lasted approximately 9 seconds. "This is the office. Phone here, if it rings. Keys for rooms 1 through 6 are behind you." She gestured vaguely at the corkboard covered in keys hanging on strings like some macabre wind chime. "Room 7? She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "What about room 7? I asked. I already know, and I'd hate to answer. "The door's stuck shut. Been that way for years. Don't worry about it." But of course I worried about it. That's how my brain works. Tell me not to think about the pink elephant, and suddenly there are pink elephants everywhere. Room 7 sat at the far end of the motel. Its curtains drawn tight, door facing the parking lot like a closed eye. I settled into the chair behind the desk. It was one of those old wooden things that looked like it absorbed decades of misery and waited for something to happen. But nothing did. Midnight, I got up and walked around. Fluorescent lights in the hallway hummed with that particular frequency that makes your teeth ache if you listen too long. Rooms 1 through 6 were empty, their doors ajar, revealing generic beige interiors and beds with scratchy-looking comforters. Everything smelled faintly of industrial cleaning products and something else I couldn't quite identify. Old places have ghosts, but not that kind of haunt. They're more like impressions, the accumulated weight of 1,000 arguments, a million boring nights, the sound of crying babies and dying relationships absorbed into the walls. I was just about to head back when I heard it, a sound from room 7. Not loud, not dramatic, just scratching, like fingernails on wood, slow, deliberate, and rhythmic. I stood there for a solid minute, telling myself it was rats. Rats make this sound all the time in old buildings. It's totally normal to hear scratching sounds coming from a room you're explicitly told not to enter because the door is stuck shut and you have no idea what might be inside. Yeah, totally normal. I walked back to the office. At 2:47 a.m., yes, I checked. The phone rang. In my entire life, I never heard a more jarring sound than an old rotary telephone, shrieking in an empty motel lobby at 3 in the morning. It wasn't just loud, it was wrong, like nails on a chalkboard in audio form. I stared at it for 4 rings before picking up. Old Pine Motel? My voice came out higher than I intended. Silence. Not the dead silence of an empty line, but the pregnant kind, the kind where you can feel something or something listening on the other end. Hello? I tried again. More silence, then faint and distant, like a whisper through water. So hungry. The line went dead. I stood there holding the receiver, my hand shaking slightly. This was exactly the kind of bullcrap that happened when you took jobs you found on sketchy internet postings. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded a tour of room 7. I should have... No, not that word. I made coffee in the ancient Mr. Coffee machine behind a desk. It tasted like burnt water, but it was hot and it kept my hands busy. The scratching from room 7 had stopped. At exactly 6 a.m., Diane showed up to relieve me. She looked the same as yesterday, same tired eyes, same too-tight sweater, same hair that was surrendering to gray in patches. How was it? She asked, not really looking at me. Quiet, except for room 7. Her head snapped up. What about room 7? What do you mean, what about it? You said I shouldn't worry about it, but... I said don't go in there. She was definitely nervous now. Her hands were shaking as she poured herself coffee from the pot. You didn't go in there, did you? No, Diane. I'm not suicidal, but I heard scratching sounds and the phone rang with some weird voice. The phone rang? Now she looked genuinely alarmed. Once, around 3 a.m. She set down her coffee cup too hard. It clattered against the desk. You need to leave. What? You need to leave right now. Get out of here. Go home. She was practically pushing me toward the door. But I'm supposed to work. Forget it. You're fired. Take your paycheck and go. Don't come back. I stood there confused and annoyed. What the hell is going on? Diane's face had gone pale under all that makeup. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. The Sin Goblin is hungry again. That's what's going on. Now get the heck out of here before what? But she'd already turned away, heading toward room 7 with the determined gait of someone who had accepted their fate. I didn't stick around to see what happened next. Back in my apartment, a studio that smelled like mildew and broken dreams, I did what any rational person would do when they get fired by a crazy woman, like hearing scratching sounds from a locked motel room. I went down the rabbit hole of internet search, so deep I almost didn't make it back. First stop, local news archives. Old Pine Motel came up in 1987 article about vandalism and suspicious activity at the property. The owner, one Arthur Pineda, had been cited multiple times for health code violations and was described as reclusive. Then I found an old forum post from 2004 on Paranormal Investigation site. Subject, Old Pine Motel. Anyone been there? Up here, me and my friends went ghost hunting at the Old Pine Motel last weekend. Place is creepy as hell. Room 7 is completely off limits. Owner wouldn't even let us near it. Bet we got some audio on our recorders from the hallway outside. Sounds like... I don't know how to describe it. Like someone crying and laughing at the same time. And there was a smell. Anyway, we're planning another trip soon if anyone wants to come. No replies. Next hit. An obituary from 2011. Arthur Pineda, age 78, died of natural causes. The article mentioned he'd owned the motel since 1965 and was a private man who kept to himself. One more thing caught my eye. A scanned image of something that looked like a local newspaper clipping from 1973. Headline was grainy, but readable. Mystery fire destroys motel room. Owner refuses to comment. Article mentioned that room 7 had been completely gutted by fire, but the cause was unknown and no one was injured. I leaned back in my chair. Something about this all felt wrong. Not just weird motel with creepy room wrong, but fundamentally wrong. Like I stumbled onto something that shouldn't exist outside of horror movies. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You shouldn't have listened. I should have blocked the number, reported to the police, but done literally anything except what I actually did, which was grab my keys and drive back to the Old Pine Motel at midnight. I know. What were you thinking? Well, let me tell you, my brain was running on approximately 3 hours of sleep, 2 energy drinks, and the kind of stupid bravado that makes people do things they'll never understand later. The motel looked different at night, more present. The neon signs, broken letters seemed to be spelling something worse than Old Pine. When half its lights were dead, the parking lot was empty except for my car. No other vehicles, not even Diane's beat-up Honda Civic. I walked up to the opposite door. Locked. Of course it was locked. But the side door led straight to room 7, which wasn't locked at all. Standing in the doorway, I had a choice. Walk away and never look back, or push through into whatever waited on the other side. I pushed through. The hallway stretched before me like something from a dream or a nightmare. Fluorescent lights were off, but there was light anyway, faint bioluminescence coming from underneath room 7's door, pulsing in slow waves of sickly green. The scratchings had returned, closer now, desperate. I approached the door slowly, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The keyhole was empty, no lock mechanism on this side either. Someone had removed it completely. The bioluminescent light pulsed faster as I got closer. And then, I heard voices coming from inside room 7. It wasn't one voice, but many, layered on top of each other like a terrible choir. Some were high and childlike, others were low and guttural. They spoke in fragments that almost made sense. So hungry. Give it what it wants. Pineda knew. Burned away but not gone. I pressed my ear against the door. Beating time again soon. The smell hit me then, not through the crack under the door, but somehow in my mind it was the stretch of rotting meat left in the summer heat mixed with sulfur and something sweetly glowing like flowers that had been dead for weeks. I stumbled backwards, gagging. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, standing perfectly still, was a figure, small, maybe 4 foot tall, if you're generous, with skin that seemed to shift between colors in a dark, gray to green to something that looked like raw meat. It had too many joints in its limbs and fingers that were just slightly wrong. Too long, tapering into points instead of proper fingernails. It was watching me with eyes that reflected light like an animal's, but burned with unmistakable intelligence. The Sin Goblin tilted its head slowly. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once. Not through my ears, but directly into my skull. You shouldn't have came back. I ran, not toward the office, that would take too long, not to my car because I'd stupidly parked at the far end of the building. So I went forward past room 7, down the hallway that led down to the pool area. The Old Pine had a swimming pool once upon a time. Now it's just a cracked concrete basin filled with murky green water and the bones of someone's abandoned patio furniture. I vaulted over the chain-link fence surrounding it, not gracefully, and landed hard on my ankle. Pain shot up my leg, but I didn't stop moving. Behind me, I heard movements, that same rhythmic, scratching sound that now accompanied by a wet, slithering noise like something being dragged across the pavement. The back entrance to the motel was supposed to be here somewhere. There. I yanked on the door handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. The Sin Goblin appeared at the top of the stairs leading down from the second floor. It moved differently now, not walking but sort of blowing, limbs bending in ways that made my eyes hurt to watch. Its mouth hung open, revealing rows of teeth that were all wrong. Too many, too sharp, arranged in concentric circles like a nightmare version of conch shell. "Nowhere left," it said in a voice that inside my head. "Run out of places." My hands were shaking as I looked around for anything, a rock, a pipe, something to defend myself with. All I found was an old metal folding chair half submerged in the pool water. "It'll have to do." The Sin Goblin flowed down the stairs with unnatural grace, its two long fingers scraping against the concrete and leaving trails of something dark that might have been blood or might have been oil, might have been nothing at all. Just my brain trying to process something it wasn't built to understand. I grabbed the folding chair with both hands. It was heavier than expected. Waterlogged, but still solid. The metal frame had rusted in places, flaking away like skin. When it reached the bottom of the stairs, the creature stopped. We stared at each other across 20 feet of cracked concrete and murky pool water. "You can't hurt me," it said, and there was something almost amused in that voice inside my head. "I'm not flesh." "Yeah, well, neither is the chair, but I'll bet you'll still hate it when I hit you with it." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The Sin Goblin lunged. Not fast, the movement seemed to take forever and no time at all simultaneously. But fast enough that I barely got the chair up in time. The impact sent vibrations through my arms as metal met something. Not quite solid, not quite liquid, somewhere in between. The creature shrieked, a sound like tearing fabric mixed with broken glass, and recoiled. His skin, if you can call it that, had torn where the chair struck, revealing underneath not blood or organs, but a swirling mass of darkness shot through, with veins of stickly green light. "You're solid," I realized out loud. "You can be hurt." The Sin Goblin's eyes narrowed. When it spoke again, there was anger now underneath the amusement. "Temporary vessel, flesh to house what cannot die." It came at me again, this time with both hands reaching for my throat. I swung wildly. The chair connected with its shoulder, and more of that dark substance leaked out of the concrete. The thing stumbled backwards into the pool. For a moment, nothing happened. The Sin Goblin stood in the shallow end of the pool. The water came only to its waist, looking down at itself in surprise. Then it began to thrash, splashing murky water everywhere as if suddenly remembering that it hated being wet. Or maybe hating wasn't quite the right word. It was more like reacting, instinctively, like poking an animal with a stick and watching it flinch. I didn't wait around to find out why water bothered it. I ran, limping badly on my twisted ankle, for the back entrance again, this time trying every door along the wall of the pool house until one finally, mercifully, gave way under pressure from my shoulder. Inside was dark and smelled like chlorine and decay, but there was another door on the opposite side that led to the parking lot where my car waited. Almost there. Almost. The Sin Goblin crashed to the wall behind me. Not walked through or opened a door, but crashed, sending chunks of concrete and rebar flying like shrapnel. The thing was bigger now, or maybe it had been that size all along and I'd just been too scared to see it clearly before. Standing at least 6 foot tall, with arms that hung down past its knees, its head tilted at an angle that shouldn't have been possible. Neck bones cracking audibly in the silence between heartbeats. When those burning eyes fixed on me again, there was no amusement left anywhere in them, just hunger. Pure, absolute hungry. "Can't let you escape." It hissed directly into my brain while its mouth worked soundlessly below. I dove through the second door and kept running toward my car, which wouldn't start. Of course it wouldn't freaking start. Keys in ignition, turn. Click, click, click. Then nothing except the pathetic whine of a battery that decided this was an excellent time to die on me. Behind me, the Sin Goblin emerged from the pool house entrance. Its movements were slower now. Maybe the water had actually done something to slow it down, and its skin was weeping that dark substance everywhere like some kind of grotesque sweat. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. Come on, you piece of crap. I smacked the steering wheel. Just this once. The creature took another step toward me, dragging one leg behind it in a way that looked almost apologetic if you squinted really hard. Which you shouldn't, because nothing about this situation warranted squinting for any reason whatsoever, except maybe to avoid looking directly at what was happening. My phone buzzed. Again. With the unknown number. Get out of the car. Run towards Route 47. Who the hell? Now! I grabbed my phone and bolted from the car, headed for Route 47, which was approximately 200 yards away through all the tall grass that came up past my knees, and definitely had things living in it that I didn't want to know about. The Sin Goblin let out a sound like steam escaping from a broken pipe as it spotted me running away. And then another figure appeared between me and the motel. Diane! She was holding something. A crucifix, maybe? Or just a piece of wood shaped vaguely cross-like, and saying words in a language I didn't recognize. Her voice was steady despite the fact that she looked like she might vomit at any second. The Sin Goblin stopped immediately, his burning eyes fixed on her with that what could only be described as wariness or possibly respect for something he actually feared. What do you want? Diane asked in a strange language, or maybe not language, just sounds that meant things when spoken correctly. The creature's head tilted again and possibly far to one side. When it spoke this time, its voice came through my ears instead of directly my skull. Mine. No, Diane said simply. Diane and the Sin Goblin stared at each other across the motel parking lot while I stood there in the tall grass with my bad ankle trying to decide if there was a good time to faint or a terrible one. The creature spoke again, still using its regular voice instead of the skull invasion technique. You keep the man, I take someone else. Who? Diane's voice was flat, tired, like had this conversation before, knew exactly where it led. Someone hungry. The Sin Goblin gestured vaguely at Route 47. Someone wants what I have to offer. I started limping toward them because apparently my brain had detected that watching whatever was about to happen unfold from a distance was better than being safely far away. Spoiler, it wasn't. Diane, what the hell is going on? I hissed when I got close enough. She didn't look at me. Her eyes never left the Sin Goblin as she spoke. It feeds on sin, literally. It consumes people's worst impulses, greed, lust, violence, and grows stronger from them. She paused, swallowing hard. But it can only feed when someone makes a deal first. What kind of deal? The Sin Goblin smiled with all those concentric circles of teeth. The kind where you give me something I want in exchange for something you want. Its attention shifted back to Diane. Or someone. Nobody else is making deals tonight, Diane said firmly. Then we do it this way. The creature's skin began shifting colors faster. Gray, green, red, purple, and its form started to blur at the edges like static on an old TV screen. I take what I'm owed. What does it want from you? I asked Diane. She finally looked at me, and I saw exhaustion written in every line of her face. Same thing it wants from everyone eventually. A sin to feed on, something dark enough that giving it up would destroy me. The Sin Goblin laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of bone. You've been hoarding so long, Diane, building your sins like a nest. It took a step forward despite Diane's cross thing, whatever it was, still being held up in mourning. When are you going to admit that some things can't be saved? What did you do? I asked her. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I killed my husband. Just like that, no preamble, no build-up, just 5 words that hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire nobody wanted to acknowledge. I killed my husband. She repeated louder this time, as if saying it again would make it real, or maybe undo it by force of repetition. He was beating me, had been for years, but I waited until he passed out drunk one night, and She trailed off, shaking her head. I hit him with a cast iron skillet 3 times. The Sin Goblin's eyes brightened. Anger, fear, desperation, guilt. It said the words like tasting them, all mixed together in a delicious way. Such a delicious way. But you didn't get arrested? I said slowly, putting it together. Because this thing, I gestured at the Sin Goblin, took your guilt in exchange for keeping quiet about what happened? Diane nodded miserably. And now it wants more? It always wants more. Her hands were shaking as she held up her makeshift cross, or whatever it was, with decreasing conviction. That's how these things work. You make one deal, then another to fix the problem caused by the first deal, then a third to fix those problems. The Sin Goblin had stopped paying attention to us and was instead sniffing the air like an animal that caught scent of a prey. There's someone close, it said thoughtfully. Someone much hungrier than either of you. We all turned toward Route 47. A man was walking down the road, staggering, really, like someone had had too much to drink or maybe wasn't entirely sober to begin with. They wore a stained tank top and jeans with holes in the knees, carrying a half-empty bottle of something that was probably cheap liquor. He didn't see us at first because he was singing some country song off-key while swinging his bottle like a metronome. The Sin Goblin's attention locked onto him immediately. Now this is interesting. What does it mean? I asked Diane. She lowered her cross thing slightly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders if relief was all over her face. It means someone else is more appealing prey. She sounded almost giddy with relief. Thank goodness. The drunk man had spotted us now, or at least spotted the lights from my dead car, and was making his way toward the motel parking lot with unsteady steps. Hey, he called out, waving his bottle. Y'all got a room? I'm kinda lost and... The Sin Goblin flowed forward faster than I'd seen it move yet, not walking or running, but simply moving from one place to another instantaneously, like someone flipping pages in a book until they land on whatever page interests them most. The drunk man's face went slack with shock as a creature materialized right in front of him. What? What are you? Someone hungry, the Sin Goblin said happily. Then it lunged forward and grabbed his head with both hands, fingers sinking into the flesh like it was made of warm clay rather than bone and skin. The man's scream was brief, a single sharp gasp cut off mid-breath as those concentric circles of teeth bit down hard into his skull. I can't describe what happened next without using words that don't exist in any normal vocabulary. It wasn't just violence. It was something else entirely, something that hurt to watch even though I couldn't look away. The Sin Goblin's mouth opened wider than should have been anatomically possible, and I saw inside not teeth or tongue, but a kind of void, a hole in reality itself with sickly green light, leaking out around the edges like fluorescency, bleeding through cracks in the ceiling. It pulled something out of the drunk man's head, not blood or brains, but something shimmering and dark that looked almost solid until you tried to focus on it directly, at which point your eyes would slide away as if unable to process what they were seeing. The man collapsed to his knees, still alive somehow despite having been bitten through the skull, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly while his hands clutched at his head, where there should have been blood but wasn't. Just that same dark, oily substance weeping from the wounds like tears made of tar. The Sin Goblin consumed whatever had pulled out of him in one gulp, his throat bulging obscenely as it swallowed something that definitely shouldn't fit down any normal esophagus. Then it tossed aside what remained of the man, his body hitting the ground with a wet thud, and let out a sound that was either satisfaction or pain or both simultaneously. Diane turned away, one hand over her mouth. "Gosh," she whispered, "it's been so long since I saw it feed." "How long?" My voice came out higher than normal because apparently my body was trying to achieve a higher pitch than human ears could detect in order to express how completely freaked up this situation was. 5 years. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much already before tonight. It usually only needs one person every few months, but sometimes people have more sense to give. I finished for her when she trailed off. She nodded miserably. The Sin Goblin was looking at us. Well, not exactly looking, because those burning eyes seemed to be seeing through us rather than at us. But there was something different in his posture now that it had eaten. It stood straighter somehow. His skin had stopped weeping that dark substance, and instead of gleamed with a faint oily sheen like it was healthy or satisfied or whatever the hell you call it when an entity made of pure malice just consumes someone's soul or whatever part of people these things actually eat. "I'm full," it announced cheerfully. Yes, cheerfully, in that voice that bypassed ears entirely. "For now." The Sin Goblin walked back towards the motel entrance with almost jaunty gait. If you can imagine something that shouldn't exist walking anywhere with any kind of gait at all. "Wait," Diane called after it. The creature stopped and turned around. "Yes?" "You said earlier you'd take someone else in exchange for leaving the man alone." She gestured at me. "I'm offering myself." "What?" I grabbed her arm. "No, absolutely not." She shook off my hand gently but firmly. "It's already done. Doesn't matter what either one of us want now." The Sin Goblin tilted its head, that impossible angle again, and seemed to consider this proposal carefully. "You certain? Once I take your guilt about killing your husband, plus all your other sins you've been hoarding." "I'm certain." Diane's voice was steady, like someone who had made a peace with something terrible. "Just make it quick." I stepped between them. "Hold on a minute." The Sin Goblin raised one hand and I felt pressure on my chest. Not physical, but psychological, like being pushed by an invisible force. And suddenly found myself unable to move, even though nothing was actually touching me. "You should have thanked her," the creature said conversationally while Diane walked past me toward it with slow, deliberate steps. "Most people don't get second chances at redemption." "What kind of redemption is this?" I demanded despite being frozen in place by whatever psychic bullcrap this thing could do. "She gets to unburden herself." The Sin Goblin's voice was almost gentle now, which somehow made it more horrifying than when it had been aggressive, because gentleness implied understanding, understanding implied intelligence, which meant we're dealing with something that not only existed, but thought about existing. "And I get to feed." Diane stopped in front of the creature. "I'm ready." The Sin Goblin reached out one too long hand towards Diane's face, fingers curling like claws, but not quite touching it, hovering just above her skin as if giving her one last chance to back out. "This will hurt," it said matter-of-factly. "I can't take the sin without taking pain along with it." "I know." Diane closed her eyes and tilted her head back, exposing her throat, in a gesture that was either submission or surrender, depending on which word you preferred for describing giving up everything that made life worth living. But before those clawed fingers could touch her, something changed. The dead man's body on the ground suddenly convulsed violently and sat upright despite having no reason to be doing anything except for lying there as a corpse. His eyes opened wide, showing whites around the pupils dilated so far looked like black holes in his head. "No!" His voice came out wrong. Not human anymore, but distorted, like someone screaming through water or speaking from very far away. Or maybe both simultaneously, because nothing about this made sense, and probably wouldn't make sense ever again, even if we somehow survived it, which is starting to seem increasingly unlikely. The Sin Goblin spun around. "What did you do?" "I didn't." The drunk man's body struggled to its feet despite being clearly dead, or mostly dead, or whatever state of undeadness applied here. His mouth opened wider than should have been possible. Yes, again, with impossible biology, because apparently tonight was all about things breaking physical laws. And something dark poured around it. Not liquid exactly, but more like shadow made solid that writhed and twisted as it emerged from his throat. The Sin Goblin stumbled backwards. "Impossible." Diane. "Oh, Diane whispered beside me. She's freaking out. I could move again, which suddenly seemed important, but I wasn't sure why yet. It's awakening something else. The shadow that poured out of the drunk man's mouth grew larger and darker until it took on a vaguely humanoid shape. But wrong somehow. Too tall, limbs too long in different ways, and the Sin Goblin's limbs were wrong. Its face was just an absence where features should have been. A smooth flatness like someone had erased something that used to exist. The new entity spoke in a voice that sounded like multiple people talking over each other. "You ate my host." The Sin Goblin crouched low. Adopt posture? Defensive? It was hard to tell with creatures that shouldn't exist. "I didn't know he was claimed." "Doesn't matter." The shadow thing head tilted at an angle that was almost identical to how Sin Goblin had tilted its own head, which felt significant even though I couldn't articulate why. "You stole from me." Diane grabbed my arm, hard enough to bruise. "We need to leave now." But before we could take more than 2 steps toward my still dead but hopefully about to live again car, both creatures turned their burning eyes, the Sin Goblin and the featureless face shadow thing, toward us, simultaneously. "No," said the Sin Goblin flatly while Diane was already dragging me backward away from whatever was about to happen next. The shadow thing reached out its arms that extended impossibly far, like taffy being pulled apart slowly, and grabbed hold of something invisible in the air between itself and its prey. "If I can't have my host back, then you both will do." What happened next is mostly a blur because my brain decided that survival required filtering out approximately 90% of sensory input, otherwise known as things that world cause permanently psychological trauma if witnessed in full detail. The Sin Goblin and Shadow thing collided in the middle of the parking lot with an impact that sent shockwaves rippling through the air. And I'm not being metaphorical here. Actual visible waves like someone had dropped a stone into water. except instead of spreading across liquid, they spread across space itself. Cars in the distance. There were cars now? Had there been cars before? Shook on their axles. Windows shattered, not just our motel windows, but apparently some others too, because I heard glass breaking from multiple directions all at once. And through it all, these two creatures fought each other with weapons that weren't quite physical, but also definitely had mass and weight, and caused damage when they connected. Which they did frequently, since neither seemed willing to give ground or admit defeat, or whatever the heck you call it when immortal entities made of pure malice decide to have a grudge match in your motel parking lot at 3 a.m. on what had already become an objectively terrible night. The Sin Goblin moved faster, all those two long limbs letting it strike from angles its opponent couldn't predict. But the shadow thing was bigger, and it could absorb blows that would have destroyed anything made of normal matter. When they grappled together, their forms seemed to blend at the edges like oil mixing with water, or maybe more accurately like two different types of darkness, trying to occupy the same space simultaneously, which physics apparently has strong opinions about, because there was visible distortion to reality itself whenever they touched. Diane was pulling me toward her car now. When did she get a car? Wasn't it just us and my dead vehicle? While behind us, both creatures screamed, actually screamed, in voices that hurt to hear, even though we weren't their intended audience. You will not take what's mine. Nothing is yours. Everything belongs to the hunger. We made it to Diane's car, a rusted-out Honda Civic that smelled like cigarettes and desperation, and she was already fumbling for keys when I noticed something important. My phone, I said stupidly while watching the two creatures tear into each other with what looked like either weapons or extensions of their own bodies. I couldn't quite identify. I left it on the ground. You can buy another one. Diane turned the key in ignition and nothing happened except a pathetic clicking that might have been her car's equivalent of giving up hope. We need to get out of here, now. The passenger window exploded inward. Not shattered exactly, but rather disintegrated into dust, as if it had aged decades in less than 1 second, which might have been what happened because time was doing weird things around these creatures. Maybe my brain was just breaking down from too much horror in a too short a span of time, which seemed like valid reasoning for why everything felt surreal. Something was reaching through where the window used to be. Too many fingers, joints bending wrong, and grabbing for me with dear intent to cause harm or consume or both simultaneously, because apparently tonight was all about combining terrible options into even worse combinations. Diane slammed her hands on the steering wheel repeatedly, like that would somehow make her dead car suddenly function. Come on! Come on! The Sin Goblin noticed us trying to escape and broke away from his fight long enough to scream in my direction. Not at me, but through the space toward where I sat frozen. You can't leave. You saw me. You know what I am. Its voice inside my skull hurt worse than any physical pain, like someone was drilling holes directly into the bone. And I felt something warm running down from my nose, which might have been blood or might have been something else entirely, but definitely wasn't good regardless of which proved accurate. Shadow Thing seized the opportunity to attack while Sin Goblin was distracted, which it did with enthusiasm born either from genuine malice or instinctual violence, depending on whether such entities could be considered conscious enough for motivations beyond simple hunger. As Diane's dead car sat there, refusing to start despite her increasingly frantic attempts at revival through her sheer force of will, something else emerged from room 7 of the Old Pine Motel. I know it sounds crazy, but trust me when I say that these 3 impossible things existing simultaneously in one parking lot is objectively worse than the 2. because apparently there's something mathematical property about terrible situations multiplying when you least want them to multiply, which someone should really study more thoroughly, because this would make great material for academic papers, assuming anyone survived long enough to write them. This new arrival was different from both previous entities, smaller, but somehow more present. Like, it took up more space in reality despite being physically smaller than either Sin Goblin or Shadow Thing. It kept shifting, sometimes almost human, sometimes vaguely animal-like, sometimes just abstract forms that hurt to look at directly because your brain couldn't process what you're seeing well enough to translate it into recognizable shapes. It spoke, if speaking is the right word or whatever communication method it used, in a voice that sounded like wind through empty buildings. Too much beating here. Disturbance in the balance. The Sin Goblin and Shadow Thing both stopped fighting immediately, which felt significant because they'd been focused on destroying each other moments ago. That stopping now suggested this third entity had authority over them, or at minimum commanded respect through sheer power level difference. Observer? Hissed the Sin Goblin, with what might have been fear or might have been respect, or possibly both simultaneously. I was in my rights to. You ate claimed prey. The observer's form solidified slightly into something that looked vaguely humanoid, except its head was too large and its eyes were arranged in a spiral pattern around where a face should have been. This disrupts the equilibrium. Then punish me, but leave them alone, Diane shouted inside her dead car while frantically turning keys in ignition, despite clear evidence the strategy wasn't working. They didn't do anything wrong. The observer's attention shifted towards us, those spiral eyes focusing on our vehicle, like we're interesting specimens we're studying. Wrong is a relative term for things that existed beyond morality. He raised one hand, too many joints, fingers tapering to points, and pointed directly at me. But this one has seen too much, knows things he shouldn't know, creates discrepancy in reality's fabric. Wait, I said. Apparently my brain hadn't received the memo about when to shut up during potentially apocalyptic situations involving creatures definitely shouldn't exist, but did anyways. I don't understand what's happening. The observer tilted its oversized head, movement too fluid, like watching water flow instead of bone and muscle moving. No matter. Understanding not required for judgment. What judgment? Diane demanded while finally giving up on her car and grabbing my arm again with obvious intent to drag me out of there if necessary, which seemed both brave and stupid simultaneously depending on which aspect you focused on. The kind where someone has to pay for knowing too much. The observer's form began shifting again, growing larger, more defined, but also somehow becoming less real, like it was fading into the background, despite occupying foreground space, which didn't make sense, but then again, nothing about tonight made logical sense, so why start expecting consistency now? The Sin Goblin and the Shadow Thing had retreated to opposite sides of the parking lot, both watching the observer warily, like predators, uncertain whether they should fight or flee. Neither seemed willing to interfere, even though both clearly wanted something from me, or Diane. I wasn't entirely sure anymore which entity was targeting whom. I don't want anything, I said desperately while backing away from the observer, despite being trapped inside the car with the doors that wouldn't open because Diane had locked them reflexively when things got scary. I just came here for a job. This is all just really bad luck. Luck is an illusion. The observer reached through the windshield. Yes, through, not around or breaking it, just simply passing its hand through the glass like it wasn't there. Grabbed my throat gently enough that pressure was minimal, but somehow more terrifying than if it had been crushing my windpipe. I couldn't breathe. Or maybe I could. It's hard to explain how something can both be and not be happening simultaneously. While those spiral eyes studied me with cold curiosity. You saw the Sin Goblin. You witnessed its beating. You know now that darkness has substance and hunger has form. So what? My voice came out strangled despite minimal physical pressure on my neck, because apparently fear could constrict always without assistance from external forces. I won't tell anyone. I'll forget everything once this is over. The observer released me suddenly, so I slumped backward against the seat, and its attention shifted to Diane. She has carried guilt for 5 years, made deals she didn't understand, but she never saw true form of what she served. It turned back to me. But you have no excuse. Your ignorance was voluntary. You could have walked away multiple times, but chose to return instead. That's not fair, Diane protested while unlocking the doors with shaking hands and pulling me out into the night, which felt cold against the skin despite summer heat, because apparently my body had decided shock was appropriate response to current circumstances. He didn't know what he was getting into. Fear is not part of this. The observer's form flickered like a bad projection. There one moment, translucent the next, solid again after that, and his voice took on quality of multiple voices speaking in unison. Choose now, memory or madness. What? I managed despite throat still feeling raw from being grabbed even though no physical damage was visible. You may forget everything tonight, all knowledge of Sin Goblin and shadow things in this place, and return to a normal life with gap where memories should be. It paused dramatically, or maybe not dramatically. Hard to tell when dealing with an entity that might perceive time differently than humans. Or you may keep your memories but accept the consequences. Madness, paranoia, inability to trust reality itself because you know what lurks beneath the surface. Diane grabbed my arm again. Choose forgetting. Please, it's better. No, I interrupted before she could finish because despite everything terrible about tonight, there was something important about knowing, about understanding. That world wasn't safe or sane, but also wasn't completely random either. There were patterns, rules, even if they made no sense to normal human comprehension. I looked at Observer with what I hoped passed for defiance. I choose memory. The Observer's spiral eyes widened slightly, or maybe narrowed. Hard to tell with geometry that defied conventional facial arrangements, and something like surprise rippled through its form. Holy? Maybe, I agreed, but because honesty seemed more appropriate even during potentially existential crisis. But it's my folly to choose. Then so be it. The Observer raised both hands now. Still too many joints, still tapering fingers that looked in the wrong ways I couldn't quite articulate, and began speaking words in a language older than human civilization or possibly older than language itself, because they seemed to exist outside normal sound waves, more like concepts being spoken directly into the reality structure. The air around us compressed, and I mean compressed literally, not metaphorically, as if gravity suddenly increased tenfold, while pressure built until my ears popped and vision blurred at edges. Both other entities, the Sin Goblin and Shadow Thing, cowered away from Observer like it had become too powerful for them to face her directly. Diane was screaming, but I couldn't hear actual words because sound had stopped working properly. Or maybe it was working too well that I could somehow perceive frequencies beyond normal human hearing range, which definitely wasn't helpful given the current circumstances. The Observer's hands came together in front of its oversized head with sharp clap that shouldn't have been audible, but was anyways, and suddenly everything went white. Not just bright light, but actual white space where colors should exist. Like someone had erased reality briefly, but redrawing it according to new specifications. And a vision returned after how long? Seconds? Minutes? Hours? Both observer and shadow thing were gone. Only Sin Goblin remained, still crouched at the edge of the parking lot, watching us while its form flickered between solid and translucent, like bad special effects in an old horror movie. Diane was still standing beside me, but barely, leaning heavily against the car for support, with expression on my face mixing relief, exhaustion, and something else I couldn't quite identify. "What happened?" she whispered, because apparently we could hear again. Or maybe we'd always be able to hear, and my brain just hadn't processed audio correctly during whatever the hell that was. Sin Goblin watched us for another long moment, those burning eyes calculating whether we were worth attacking now that the observer had left, or maybe it was just deciding if feeding on someone who had chosen to keep their memories would taste different than consuming normal sinners. Then it flowed backward away from us, retreating toward the motel entrance, with movements too fluid to be entirely natural. "And go," Diane said weakly while pushing me toward my car, which inexplicably now started when I turned the key. Battery apparently having decided this was an excellent time for resurrection. "Get out of here. Don't come back." "But, please," her voice crackled on the word, and I saw tears running down her heavily made-up face as relief washed over her features. "You did the right thing choosing memory. Most people would have taken forgetting. But you need to understand what happened eventually, so find someone who knows about these things. There are people who study them." "Who?" She shook her head. "I don't know names anymore. Kept changing over years. But they're out there, if you look hard enough." She paused, swallowing before continuing. "And maybe you'll figure out how to stop this eventually. Make it so no one else has to deal with creatures like that." I wanted to say something profound or meaningful, but words failed me, because what do you say after experiencing something that shouldn't exist except for in nightmares? So instead, I just nodded and drove away without looking back. 3 weeks later, Diane's body was found in a car by Route 47. Officially listed as suicide from carbon monoxide poisoning despite no evidence of exhaust being rerouted into the vehicle. Unofficially, everyone who saw her face said she looked peaceful, like someone who had finally unburdened themselves after carrying too heavy a weight for too long. I still have nightmares about burning eyes and too long fingers reaching through the windows that shouldn't be breakable but somehow always are in the dreams where physics doesn't apply and monsters made of darkness can exist, because why not? Everything else was terrible has already happened, so what's one more impossible thing? But also keep a journal now, detailed notes about everything that happened at Old Pine Motel, and occasionally search for online forums for others who have encountered similar entities. There are other stories out there if you know where to look. Whispers of shadow beings, warnings about creatures that feed on sin, reports of observers appearing when reality's fabric gets too disturbed. Most people dismiss their accounts as fiction or delusion or just elaborate hoaxes. But I know better, because I've seen what lurks beneath the surface of the normal world. The Sin Goblin is still out there somewhere, feeding on sinners who make deals that they can't afford to keep. And honestly, that's probably the scariest part about all of this, knowing that some things never end even when you escape them once. They just wait patiently for the next opportunity to reach out and touch someone with too long fingers that shouldn't exist, but do anyway, because apparently the universe has a sense of humor about sending nightmares into lives people thought were safe, until the moment they discovered otherwise. I hope you all enjoyed today's story. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment. I'll see you next time.